in the heart of a raging blizzard. A man slammed on his brakes when he saw a mother carrying a newborn, leading a trembling 6-year-old through the storm. But the terror in their eyes told him they weren't just cold. They were running for their lives. They weren't fleeing one man. They were escaping those who would kill anyone to take the baby from her arms. 3 powerful dogs circled them like winter guardians, growling at the invisible danger closing in. And the little girl's wide, fearful yet brave eyes cut straight through the storm and into his heart. In that moment, he knew. If he didn't step forward now, the snow would bury their story before it ever had a chance to be told. Before we begin, where are you watching from? Leave a comment, and don't forget to like and subscribe to Angels in Uniform. The Montana blizzard crashed against the earth like a divine warning. A roaring white veil determined to swallow everything beneath it. The wind screamed across the empty highway, twisting snow into violent spirals that erased the world one breath at a time. Through that merciless storm, Elena Wyaka pushed forward. She was 28, tall for a Lakota woman, slender but sculpted from the quiet endurance of someone who had survived more pain than she ever spoke aloud. Her long black hair clung to her cheeks in frozen strands. Her copper-toned skin, usually warm and vibrant, looked ghostly under the flurries of white. In her arms, she held a newborn, wrapped in a white fur-lined blanket. The baby's faint, fragile warmth pressed against her chest, like the last surviving ember of a dying fire. Beside her walked Lila, her 6-year-old daughter. The little girl's dark eyes shimmered with tears that froze before they could fall. Wrapped in a cream shearling coat and a red wool scarf nearly too big for her tiny frame, she trembled but held her mother's hand tightly. "Mommy, don't fall. I'll help you walk," she whispered. The plea was so small, so heartbreaking, that Elena felt something inside her crack. But she couldn't afford to cry. Even her tears had turned to ice. Around them moved 3 silent guardians. Kodiak, the massive Alaskan Malamute, walked in front, breaking a path through the drifts, his thick gray-white fur dusted with frost. Sora, the silver-white husky with piercing blue eyes, stayed glued to Lila's side, nudging her gently each time the girl stumbled. And Ghostwind, the ash-black Native American Indian dog, brought up the rear, his sharp gaze fixed on whatever followed them through the storm. Elena knew what he sensed, who he sensed. Then her knees buckled. Her body faltered, just long enough for panic to seize Lila. "Mommy, no! You promised we'd make it!" the little girl cried, her voice shattering against the wind. Kodiak immediately lowered himself beneath Elena's arm, bracing her weight and lifting her back up. Sora pressed her cold nose to Lila's cheek in comfort. Ghostwind moved in close, his warm body shielding Elena from the slicing wind. A small family, held together by desperation, love, and fear. Ghostwind suddenly froze. His ears snapped forward, his tail stiffened, and from deep within his chest came a growl, low, warning, ancient. Elena turned. For half a heartbeat she saw it too. A silhouette, a shape weaving through the white behind them, too small to be the wind, too human to be imagined. And then, gone. But the terror it left behind settled inside her bones. "Mommy," Lila whispered, voice breaking. "Was that him?" Elena didn't answer. She couldn't. The storm seemed to tighten around them, and the world became smaller, colder, more dangerous. Elena forced her feet forward again. Each step sent pain up her legs, but she clung to the newborns. Warmth, whispering silent prayers to her ancestors. Not begging for rescue, only the strength to keep moving. The highway stretched out endlessly until a faint glow shimmered through the storm. Headlights. A truck. Old, weathered, crawling slowly through the white like some tired beast refusing to die. Inside was a man shaped by violence, discipline, and ghosts. He was 35, tall, muscular beneath layers of worn winter gear. His jaw was sharp, lined with days of rough, unshaven beard. A small scar sliced above his right eyebrow, and his gray steel eyes held a coldness that came not from the storm, but from the memory of battles he wished he could forget. His clothing matched the life he came from. A faded green M65 field jacket, a charcoal wool sweater, dark cargo pants, worn black combat boots, black leather gloves that looked as tired as he felt. Every part of him carried a history he never talked about. In the passenger seat sat a sable-furred German shepherd, trained, disciplined, alert. When the dog saw the figures in the snow, woman, child, infant, and dogs, he barked sharply, a soldier's bark. The man's hands tightened on the wheel. His chest tightened too. Instinct surged through him, not fear, but recognition. Someone out here needed help. He slammed the brakes. The truck skidded sideways, fishtailing on black ice before straightening out. Then he threw the door open and stepped into the storm. Wind punched him in the face. Snow blinded him. But still, he moved toward them. Kodiak growled a thunderous warning. Sora lowered her body, ready to strike if needed. Ghost Wind blocked the family with a rigid stance, his breath rising in white plumes. The man stopped, hands raised, palms open, showing the universal sign of someone who meant no harm. "I'm not here to hurt you," he shouted, voice swallowed by the wind. Elena clutched the baby protectively. Lila trembled, half hiding behind her mother. The man took in their faces the exhaustion, the terror, the fierce will to survive. He saw the frost forming on the newborn's blanket. He saw Lila's shaking knees. He saw Elena's skin turning pale from cold. "You can't stay out here," he called. "You won't survive another mile." For a long moment, Elena simply stared back at him, studying him, testing him. Was he safe? Was he a threat? Or was he the last chance they had? The wind screamed. The dogs shifted. The man did not move. "Let me help you," he said softly. It wasn't a command. It wasn't pity. It was something different, something raw, something honest. Elena's strength finally gave out. Her legs folded. The man reacted instantly, lunging forward and catching her before she hit the ice. The newborn whimpered. Layla cried out. All three dogs pressed in, forming a tight protective ring around them. But Elena didn't pull away. Not this time. Not now. She let herself lean into the stranger's arms, surrendering not her dignity, but her exhaustion. The storm howled, swirling around them like a living thing. And in that single fragile moment, Elena felt, for the first time in a long time, that maybe this was not the end. Maybe this was the beginning. Sometimes miracles do not come with thunder or angels. Sometimes they arrive quietly, through the hands of someone who wasn't supposed to be there, but showed up anyway. If this story touched your heart, please like, comment, and subscribe to our channel, so more souls can witness the quiet miracles God places in our path. The wind roared against the old pickup as Ethan Hale gripped the steering wheel, guiding the vehicle slowly through the white chaos. The blizzard hammered the highway with a merciless rhythm, turning every breath into cold fire. Ethan's jaw was tight, the rough, unshaven stubble along his cheeks catching the glow of the dashboard lights. At 35, he carried the carved, weather-worn look of a man who had seen too much too young. Square jaw, a scar splitting his right brow, gray eyes that had once been sharp with military certainty, but now burned quietly with losses he never spoke of. Ranger, the sable-coated German shepherd in the passenger seat, sensed the shift in Ethan's breathing before Ethan himself noticed it. The dog's ears lifted, posture stiffening with the controlled tension of a seasoned K9. In another life, Ranger had served beside Ethan in war, trained to detect danger long before humans could. Tonight, his growl was low, vibrating in the narrow cab of the truck. Ethan slowed. Headlights sliced through the storm and revealed something his mind struggled to process. A woman, barely standing, a tiny girl clutching her leg, a newborn pressed to the woman's chest, 3 large dogs circling them like living shields. Ethan slammed the brakes. The truck skidded sideways, tires scraping violently against ice before catching traction. He flung the door open, the wind ripping it backward. His boots hit the snow with a heavy thud as he shouted, "Ma'am, let me help." Elena Wyaka recoiled. She looked impossibly fragile, tall but thin, long black hair whipped across her face, copper-toned skin pale from cold, eyes dark and wide with exhaustion and fear. Her arms tightened instinctively around the newborn's fur-lined blanket. Beside her, Lila, her small 6-year-old daughter, pressed into her leg. Lila's red wool scarf fluttered like a bright ember in the storm, her cheeks flushed from cold and crying. "Mommy," Lila whispered, her voice tiny, trembling. "Is he one of the bad men?" The wind paused, as if listening. Ethan froze. Those words pierced him deeper than any bullet ever had. Because there was a time, years ago in the desert, when a little girl had cried the same thing while he tried to carry her to safety. He hadn't made it in time. His voice cracked as he stepped forward. No, sweetheart. I'm here to help. I promise." Ranger moved first, approaching Kodiak with calm authority. The Malamute lowered his head, meeting Ranger's gaze. Sora inched closer, sniffing cautiously, while Ghostwind's black-tipped ears twitched as snowfall thickened. Ranger extended his nose, and Ghostwind met him halfway. 2 guardians measuring each other not as enemies, but as brothers on different roads. They touched noses lightly. A pact formed, a silent agreement. This man is safe. Ethan slowly lowered himself to Lila's height, ignoring the cold burning his knees. "Sweetheart, I'm here to keep you warm." Lila looked at him, really looked at him, and something inside her broke open. Not fear, not distrust, but hope. She didn't even blink back her tears when she whispered, "Please, save my baby brother." And just like that, Ethan felt his heart tear open. It had been years since he allowed anyone inside the ruins of it. He swallowed hard. "I will," he said softly. "On my life." He stood, offering Elena his gloved hands. She hesitated, breath shuddering in the cold. Every instinct told her to run, to distrust, to survive alone. But her legs trembled beneath her, her arms aching under the infant's weight. Her eyes lifted to Ethan's face, harsh in the storm's light, but honest, steady, present. She placed her hand in his. The world shifted. Ethan guided her toward the truck, his body angled to shield her from the wind. Ranger and the 3 dogs moved in a coordinated ring around them, as if they'd trained together for years. The newborn whimpered softly. Elena winced. Lila hurried behind, wiping her nose on her red scarf. Inside the truck, warmth breathed life into their frozen limbs. Elena slid into the seat, holding her infant close, while Lila clambered into the back beside Ranger, who stayed astonishingly gentle, sensing the child's fear. Kodiak and the others leapt lightly into the bed of the truck, forming silhouettes against the snow. Ethan shut the door, chest rising with the weight of the moment. He returned to the driver's seat and turned up the heater. "My ranch isn't far," he said quietly. "You'll be safe there." The word safe hit Elena like a memory she no longer believed in. She nodded, eyes glassy. "Thank you," she whispered, voice cracking beneath its own exhaustion. Ethan nodded back. "You don't owe me thanks, just breathe. That's enough right now." He started the engine. The truck rolled into the storm, leaving behind the prints of 2 humans, a newborn, and 3 loyal dogs. Prints already disappearing under the snow. They had been driving only minutes when Sora, riding in the truck bed, lifted her head sharply, her blue eyes fixed on the darkness behind them. Her body stiffened. Ranger reacted instantly inside the cab, ears high, tail rigid, posture shifting into alert mode. Elena's breath caught. Lila grabbed her mother's sleeve. "Mommy, she sees something." Ethan glanced in the rearview mirror. Only white, only snow, only storm. But the dogs knew. Dogs always know. Ghost Wind let out a single low growl, so deep it vibrated through the metal of the truck bed. Something was behind them. Something following. Elena whispered, barely audible, "He found us." Ethan tightened his grip on the wheel. His jaw hardened. His eyes turned from warm steel to cold iron. "Not tonight," he muttered. "Not while you're in my truck." Ethan pressed on, navigating through the storm until the silhouette of his ranch finally appeared. A small cabin tucked between snow-heavy pines, the roof sagging slightly, the porch light faint but welcoming. It wasn't much. In fact, to Ethan, it had become a symbol of failure, a home he returned to too late, after losing people he loved. But tonight, it became something else, a refuge, a beginning. He parked the truck, turned to Elena and Lila, and offered a small, tired smile. "You're safe now," he said softly. Elena exhaled a breath she'd been holding for days. She didn't trust easily, but she believed him. As Ethan stepped out to retrieve Kodiak, Sora, and Ghostwind from the truck bed, they moved toward him, not as strangers, but as allies. For the first time in a long time, Ethan felt something unfamiliar settle into his chest. A sense of purpose, a sense of calling, a sense of destiny. Sometimes God doesn't send angels with wings. Sometimes he sends a soldier, a mother, a child, and 3 loyal dogs to remind us that miracles still walk the earth. If this chapter touched your heart, please like, comment, and subscribe so more people can hear stories of faith and God's quiet protection. The cabin breathed a faint amber glow as the fire crackled weakly in the stone hearth. Outside, the storm still clawed at the walls, wind shrieking against the wood like something desperate to be let in. But inside, a different quiet danger lingered in the air. Elena sat close to the fire, wrapped in a wool blanket. Her copper-toned skin, usually warm with life, looked pale beneath her tangled black hair. In her arms, the newborn slept fitfully, his tiny breaths brushing her collarbone like fragile puffs of smoke. Lila curled beside her mother, legs crossed under a heavy blanket. The little girl's red wool scarf was still around her neck, damp where frozen tears had melted. Sora lay pressed at Lila's side, her silver-white fur rising and falling in a steady rhythm the child clung to for comfort. Kodiak sprawled across the cabin door, a massive gray-white barricade, unmoving except for the slow rise of his chest. Ghostwind stood at the window, ears pricked, tail low, body rigid, watching the darkness without blinking. Ethan crouched by the fire. Shadows carved deep lines across his rugged face, the scar splitting his brow, the unshaven jaw, the gray eyes sharpened by years of combat and loss. He inhaled slowly, then asked the question he'd been holding back since the moment he found them on the road. "Who's chasing you?" Elena's lips quivered. Her teeth sank into them until a thin line of blood appeared. "He doesn't want me," she whispered. Her voice shook like a torn ribbon in the wind. "He wants the baby." The fire popped sharply. Leela lifted her head, eyes glistening in the fire's glow. "He hurt Auntie," she said, voice small but brave. "She tried to hide my baby brother, and he hurt her." The room stilled. Even the storm seemed to pause long enough to listen. Ethan leaned forward, tension tightening across his shoulders. "Why? He's just a child." Elena looked at her son, so tiny, so fragile. Finally, she whispered, "Because of what he carries. Because of our bloodline." The words hung in the air like incense. Powerful, ancient, dangerous. But then she stopped. Breath trapped, voice locked. Something deeper, something she feared, held her back from finishing the truth. Ghost Wind turned sharply from the window. His dark eyes locked onto Elena's. A low growl rumbled from his chest. Not hostile. A warning. Do not speak further. Not yet. Elena closed her mouth. Half the truth surfaced, half drowned again in silence. Ethan recognized the fracture instantly. In the military, he had watched men lie to survive, and others choke on the truth because speaking it might destroy them. He stood and approached the window. Snow blurred into a white void, but his instincts sharpened. "Who is he?" Ethan asked quietly. Elena tightened her hold on the newborn. "He was once part of our community, but he changed." Her voice lowered. Belief changed him. Power changed him. He thinks the baby was born with something sacred, something he is entitled to. Ethan's jaw clenched. "And do you believe that?" Elena stared at the infant, at his tiny fingers curled into the blanket, at the soft rise and fall of his chest. "I believe," she whispered, "that he deserves to grow up without men deciding he is a prophecy." Ghost Wind snapped to full attention. His body stiffened, his ears pointed straight into the wind. Sora lifted her head, eyes narrowing. Kodiak pushed harder against the door. Even Ranger, resting beside Lila, rose with silent precision, every muscle alert. A sound broke through the storm, soft, deliberate. Crunch, crunch, crunch. Footsteps, one at a time, measured, slow. Too calm for someone fighting a blizzard. Lila gasped and grabbed her mother's sleeve. Elena held the baby tighter. Ethan reached for the rifle on the wall with a calmness forged in war. Ghost Wind stepped closer to the window, nose lifting, breath fogging the glass. The growl that left him was deeper this time, an oath, not a warning. Someone was out there. Someone who already knew where they were. The footsteps eventually faded into the endless roar of the storm, but no one in the cabin relaxed. Not even as the fire grew stronger. Not even as warmth slowly filled the room again. Ethan set the rifle down beside him and knelt beside Elena. He spoke gently, softened not by pity, but by understanding. "You're safe tonight. I won't let anyone near you. Or the children." Elena met his eyes, saw the sincerity there, saw the loneliness too, but also saw a man who had been broken, rebuilt, and now stood ready to protect without asking anything in return. "Thank you," she whispered, and she meant it. The newborn whimpered softly. Lila leaned into her mother, eyelids heavy from exhaustion. Outside, the blizzard kept howling, but inside the cabin, destiny paused. Just long enough for them to gather strength for whatever waited beyond the snow. Sometimes God brings people together in storms, not to break them, but but to show them they were never meant to walk through them alone. If you believe in those quiet miracles, please like, comment, and subscribe so more souls can find hope in our stories. The fire in the cabin had settled into a steady glow by the time Ethan returned from the storage room. He held something folded carefully in his hands. An old Lakota blanket, deep indigo stitched with lightning-shaped white threads. The fabric was worn at the edges, softened by time, but it carried a gravity no ordinary object possessed. As he stepped closer to Elena, he hesitated, not out of doubt, but out of respect for whatever memory this blanket belonged to. Elena looked up, exhaustion pulling gently at the corners of her eyes. Her copper-toned skin reflected the warm light from the flames, and her long black hair framed her face in dark waves. She clutched her newborn closer, as if the baby's heartbeat steadied her own. When she saw what Ethan carried, her posture faltered. This was in the cedar chest, Ethan said softly. I thought it might keep you warm. Elena reached out with trembling fingers, brushing the fabric. The moment she touched it, her breath caught. The memory hit her like a sudden gust of wind. Her father's voice humming low, the blanket tucked around her shoulders during winter nights, the smell of pine smoke and sage. Before she could speak, something slid from the folds of the blanket. A small leather cord, aged, darkened from years of wear, fell to the floor. Lila reacted first. The 6-year-old scrambled toward it, small hands shaking as she lifted the necklace into the light. Her red wool scarf slipped from her shoulder while Sora nudged closer, sensing the change in emotion. Mommy? Lila whispered, voice thin and trembling. Is this Grandpa's? Elena's lips parted. Her eyes filled instantly, not with fear, not with exhaustion, but with grief sharpened by years of unanswered longing. She knelt beside Lila and pulled her daughter close. Yes, she breathed, tears slipping down her cheeks. He wore this until the night he died. The room seemed to exhale with her. Ethan stood frozen, not touching the moment, not wanting to intrude on the sacredness unfolding before him. His rugged features softened, square jaw unclenching, gray eyes gentling with a deep, unspoken recognition. He knew grief intimately. He knew what it meant to lose someone whose absence felt like a shadow stitched into your chest. He cleared his throat. Elena, he said quietly, I need to tell you something. She looked up, startled by the strain in his voice. Ethan sank to one knee, resting a hand on the back of Ranger, who had moved to his side. The German shepherd was alert, but calm, as if understanding that what was about to be said mattered more than any storm outside. Elena, your father didn't just die. His voice cracked slightly before he steadied it. He saved me, 15 years ago. Elena blinked, once, twice, like someone trying to process words in a language they almost understood. Ethan continued. There was a storm, much like tonight. I was fresh out of training, too confident, too blind. He exhaled slowly, haunted by a memory carved deep into him. My truck went off a cliffside. I was pinned. Couldn't move my legs. I thought I'd freeze out there. Elena's breath stilled. And then, Ethan said, he appeared out of nowhere. A Lakota man, strong, calm, with eyes that could see through you. He swallowed. He wrapped me in this blanket, this exact one, used it to stop the bleeding on my shoulder. He tried to pull me out, and he did. Lila leaned forward, hanging on every word. But when the ground gave way under us, he pushed me to safety. Ethan's gaze dropped. He went over the edge instead. Silence closed over them like snow falling in slow motion. Elena brought a hand to her mouth, her voice breaking. That was the night he never came home. Ghost Wind suddenly padded over, his ash-black fur shimmering in the firelight. The normally stoic dog lowered his head to the leather cord in Lila's hands and pressed his muzzle against it gently, as if recognizing the scent. Recognizing the man who had once walked beside him. Elena gasped softly. The gesture was too sure, too tender, too knowing. Kodiak rose from the door, lumbering closer with the heavy dignity of an old guardian. Sora tucked herself at Lila's side protectively. Even the newborn shifted in Elena's arms, stirring as if somehow aware of the name echoing in the room. Ethan waited for Elena's reaction. Anger, blame, grief, anything. But what he didn't expect was the softness in her eyes as she lifted the leather cord and placed it gently over her heart. "He saved one more life that night," she whispered. "Yours." Ethan's shoulders sagged, not with shame, but with relief. He had carried that memory like a stone for years. Now, for the first time, he wasn't carrying it alone. The fire flickered. A gust of wind slammed against the cabin wall. Ghost Wind's ears snapped upward again. But this time, he didn't growl. He walked toward Ethan, stopped halfway. And then he lifted his paw and placed it gently on the Lakota blanket. Just a single touch. But the room shifted. Ethan's breath hitched. Elena froze. Lila's eyes widened with childlike awe. Ghost Wind held his paw there for several seconds, long enough for it to feel intentional, guided, almost symbolic, as if acknowledging, the past is not gone. It watches. It guides. It brought you here for a reason. A soft warmth moved through the cabin. Something unspoken but undeniably present. Destiny. Legacy. Or perhaps grace. When Ghost Wind stepped back, Elena wiped her tears and gathered her children close. The heaviness of grief was still there. But now it lived beside something gentler. Hope. Ethan exhaled slowly, letting the weight of confession leave him. "I'm sorry I didn't tell you sooner," he murmured. Elena shook her head. "You honored him by living. And now, by helping us." The newborn whimpered, and Lila cradled the leather cord against her chest, whispering, "Grandpa's watching us. Right, Mommy?" Elena kissed the top of her daughter's head. "Yes, Lila, he is." Outside, the storm raged on. Inside, a past buried by snow had been uncovered by a sign and by the strange, quiet timing only God could orchestrate. Sometimes the people we lose still guide our steps. Sometimes their love walks ahead of us, through storms we cannot face alone. If this chapter touched your heart, please like, comment, and subscribe, so more souls can feel the gentle miracles God still sends our way. Ethan moved carefully around the small cabin, lighting a second oil lamp to soften the shadows pushing against the walls. The storm had eased slightly outside, but the wind still moaned through the cracks, like an old grief refusing to die. Elena sat near the fire, her long black hair falling over her shoulders as she rocked the newborn slowly, whispering something in Lakota under her breath. Her copper-toned skin glowed in the firelight, but her eyes held exhaustion carved deep from months, perhaps years of fear. Lila leaned against Sora, who lay curled protectively around the little girl. The silver-white fur of the husky shimmered under the warm light, and Lila stroked her gently, grounding herself. Kodiak remained at the door, his massive frame blocking the draft. Ghost Wind paced once, slow and deliberate, before taking his place near the window again, always guarding, always listening. Ethan approached Elena quietly. "Let me help," he said, voice low, worn from the weight of new truths revealed the night before. Elena hesitated, but finally, she let him take the baby for a moment. Ethan supported the tiny body with unexpected gentleness, his rough, scarred hands moving with the practiced steadiness of someone who had once pulled injured soldiers out of burning buildings. The newborn shifted, fussing softly. As Ethan adjusted the blanket, something caught his eye. A faint mark, very faint, pale as morning frost, shifting with each breath of the child. A swirl, like a tiny storm frozen beneath the skin. Ethan froze. "Elena, what is this?" The words were barely a whisper, yet they struck the room like a gust of ice. Elena looked up sharply. She reached for the newborn, panic filling her dark eyes. The blanket slipped from her grasp as she pressed the infant against her chest. "The winter mark," she whispered. "It only appears once in a generation." Lila, clutching the leather cord of her grandfather, lifted her head slowly. "Auntie had the same mark. Before she died." The fire seemed to dim with those words. Ethan felt the air around them tighten. This wasn't about a wounded family or a man chasing them. It wasn't even about survival anymore. This was about legacy, heritage, and a burden carved long before any of them were born. Ethan sat down across from Elena, staring at the swirling mark. His military mind searched for logic, patterns, explanations. None fit. "Elena," he said gently, "you need to tell me what this means." She held the newborn close, rocking him as if movement could hide the truth. "It comes from my father's line," she began, voice trembling. "From elders older than any record we still have. The winter mark appears on a child only when—" But she stopped. Her breath shuddered. Her eyes flicked toward the window where Ghostwind stood frozen, staring into the dark as if hearing something only he could decipher. Ethan leaned forward, recognizing fear when he saw it. "What does it mean?" Lila scooted closer to her mother, wrapping her small arms around Elena's waist. Her eyes glistened, not with fear this time, but with the quiet bravery she tried so hard to mirror from the dogs who protected her. "It means," Elena whispered, "that someone out there thinks my son is owed to them, promised to them, and they will not stop." Ghostwind stiffened. Every muscle along his ash-black back rippled. His ears locked forward. His entire body leaned toward the window with an intensity that made Ethan rise to his feet instantly. "What is it, boy?" Ethan asked, reaching for the rifle leaned against the cabinet. But Ghostwind wasn't staring into the woods. He was staring upward, slowly, deliberately. He lifted his head toward the cabin roof. Kodiak rose next, a deep rumble vibrating from his chest. Sora's silver fur bristled as she shuffled closer to Lila, tail lowered, body curled protectively. Elena's breath caught. "Ethan, no one should be on that roof." For a moment there was nothing. Just the wind. Then, a sound. Soft. Too soft for falling snow. A single creak of wood, as if someone gently tested their weight upon the beams above them. Ethan raised the rifle. Elena clutched the baby tighter. Lila pressed her face into Sora's fur. Ghostwind growled, a low, controlled warning. This growl was different. Not territorial, not frightened. It was recognition, as if something outside, or above, carried a scent from long, long ago. Ethan's jaw clenched. "Elena," he whispered, "who exactly knows about the winter mark?" Her answer came out like a prayer cracked in half. "Too many, and none who should." Minutes passed. The roof creaked once more, then went silent. Ethan stepped outside to check, snow whipping around him in violent spirals. The roof held nothing. No tracks, no movement, no trace of life. Yet Ghostwind remained alert long after Ethan returned, his dark eyes never leaving the ceiling. Inside, Elena finally continued. "The winter mark appears when the land chooses a child," she said. "Some say it is a blessing, One meant to bring balance. Others. She swallowed hard. Others believe it means the child holds power meant to be taken. Ethan sat beside her, placing the rifle within arm's reach, but keeping his hands open, a gesture of trust. "And you?" he asked softly. "What do you believe?" She looked down at her son. The swirling mark pulsed faintly beneath the skin, the motion so subtle Ethan wondered if he'd imagined it. "I believe," Elena said slowly, "that God places burdens on the ones who can survive them, and He places protectors in their path." Her gaze lifted to Ethan, and then to Ranger, sitting beside him, solid, brave, waiting. For the first time since they'd met, hope flickered inside the shadow of fear. Lila crawled into Ethan's lap, surprising him. "Will you protect him, too?" she asked. Her voice was small, but her trust was enormous. Ethan rested a gentle hand on her back. "With everything I have," he promised. Ghost Wind's tail swept once across the floor, as if approving. Outside, the storm began to break apart. Inside, something new began to form. A fragile alliance, a chosen family, a destiny none of them fully understood yet, but one they were now walking toward together. Sometimes the signs God gives us are subtle. Sometimes they appear as storms, or a mark on a newborn skin. If you believe every life is guided by a higher hand, please like, comment, and subscribe, so more hearts can find hope in the miracles hidden inside our stories. The cabin had settled into a tense stillness, the kind that presses against the ribs and makes air harder to breathe. Elena sat on the edge of the cedar bed, her newborn held close, the winter mark pulsing faintly beneath the swaddled blanket. Lila lay beside her mother, half asleep, but refusing to close her eyes fully. Sora curled tightly against the child's side, her silver fur rising and falling in protective rhythm. Ethan checked the windows for the third time, each movement steady and efficient, shaped by years of combat discipline. His broad shoulders moved beneath his worn flannel, and his jaw tightened with a familiar edge. Ranger shadowed him silently, the K9's amber eyes tracking every flicker of motion outside. The storm had thinned, but the dark had not. Kodiak lay stretched near the door, massive and unmoving, except for the steady twitch of his ears. Ghost Wind stood beside him, tail low, gaze fixed on the shadows creeping across the porch. Then, all three dogs reacted at once. Kodiak rose with a deep, vibrating growl. Ghost Wind lunged forward, planting his body in front of the door. Sora sprang up, leaping onto the bed and curling around Lila and the baby before Elena even had time to gasp. Lila clutched Sora's fur. "Mommy, what's happening?" Before Elena could answer, the sound came. A slow, deliberate knock. Not frantic, not confused. A knock of someone who already knew exactly who was inside and what they wanted. Then a voice, muffled by the wooden door, but unmistakably calm. "Elena," the man called. "Open the door. I only want the child." Elena's blood turned to ice. She pressed her back against the wall, pulling the newborn tighter. "No!" Lila screamed, her voice breaking. "You can't take my brother." Ethan stepped forward, his posture shifting in an instant from guardian to soldier. He lifted his rifle with calm precision, planting his feet wide, his scarred brow lowered in a controlled, deadly focus. "Elena," Ethan murmured, not turning his head. "Get to the corner. Keep the kids behind the dresser." Elena obeyed, trembling, moving the children while holding her son so close she could feel his tiny heartbeat against her chest. The man outside chuckled, a cold, hollow laugh. "You don't understand, soldier," he said. "That baby carries a legacy older than either of you." Ethan clicked the safety off. "What legacy?" he demanded. But the man didn't answer the question. Instead, he shifted tone, almost serene. "It's already begun. The mark has awakened." Ghostwind snarled, a sound Ethan had never heard from him before. It wasn't just protective. It was furious, primal, certain. Elena covered Lila's ears as tears slid silently down her cheeks. The knock came again, softer this time. "Elena, open the door," the man whispered. "You know this is bigger than blood." Ethan steadied his rifle. "One more step," he warned, "and I shoot." But before either man could act, a flash of red and blue light streaked across the window. The dogs barked, loud, unified, as two vehicles skidded to a halt outside the cabin. Within seconds, two figures burst from the storm. Sheriff Cole Maddox, broad-shouldered, late 50s, weathered by decades of Montana winters, moved first. His thinning gray hair whipped in the wind beneath his Stetson, and his heavy coat snapped like a flag as he raised his flashlight and service weapon. Behind him followed Deputy Mara Holt, a tall, sharply built woman in her early 30s. Her braided brown hair swung over her tactical vest as she stepped forward, her breath visible in harsh puffs. Her green eyes were keen, alert. Too many night calls had carved caution into her bones. "Hands where I can see them," the sheriff barked. Elena pressed a hand to her mouth when she heard the voice. Relief punched through her chest so quickly her knees buckled. Ethan risked a glance out the window. The man outside, tall, lean, long black hair plastered to his face by snow, stood completely still. His coat was dark, heavy, trimmed with fur. His skin pale beneath frost. His eyes held a disturbing calmness, like a storm buried deep inside. He raised his hand slowly. "Sheriff," the man said, voice flat. "This is a mistake." Maddox didn't waver. "You're trespassing, threatening a family, and ignoring a protective order. Hands behind your head." The man smiled, a thin, eerie smile. "You think this is about law?" Deputy Holt stepped closer. "Sir, do it now. We're not asking again." Finally, he interlaced his fingers behind his head. The officers moved swiftly. When the sheriff snapped cuffs onto his wrists, the man didn't resist. But he did turn, directly toward Elena inside the cabin. His eyes locked onto hers through the frost-covered glass. Dark, intense, knowing. "They're coming," he whispered, voice barely audible. "And they won't stop." Deputy Holt shoved him toward the cruiser. But he never broke eye contact with Elena. Ever. As the cruiser door slammed shut, the wind around the cabin shifted, sharp, sudden, unnatural. Snow swirled in a tight spiral near the porch like a tiny vortex. Ghost wind stiffened, ears pricked, stepping toward the strange motion with slow, deliberate steps. Then the baby stirred, crying for the first time in hours. The winter mark pulsed, faintly glowing beneath the blanket. Not enough for light, but enough for Elena to see it with her own eyes. Enough for Ethan to freeze mid-step. Enough for Lila to whisper, "Mommy, it's breathing." For the first time, Elena realized. The mark wasn't just a sign. It was awakening. The sheriff knocked gently before entering, Ranger immediately recognizing him and relaxing slightly. Maddox removed his hat, snow sliding off the brim. "You're safe tonight," he said. His voice, stern by nature, held a rare tenderness. "We'll take him in. He won't bother you again." Elena nodded, though her eyes told another truth. He wasn't the real threat. He was only the beginning. Deputy Holt examined the shattered piece of the cabin with a practiced eye. "You folks need anything else?" We'll have extra patrols out until the storm passes." Ethan stepped forward, his posture respectful. "Thank you, really." Maddox placed a hand on his shoulder. "You did right, son. You protected them." The sheriff's gaze lingered on Elena, the newborn, the mark. Something flickered across his expression. Recognition, worry, a memory he didn't speak of, but he said nothing. The officers left, their vehicles slicing back into the storm. Inside, silence returned, but not safety. Elena held her son close, her voice barely a whisper. "It's starting." Ethan sat beside her, placing a gentle hand over hers. "Then we face it together." Ghost wind lay across the doorway, eyes glowing in the fading firelight, as if guarding not just the cabin, but the future quietly forming within it. And sometimes, in the darkest storms, God sends warriors not with wings, but with scars, with faith, and with hearts brave enough to love again. If this chapter touched your spirit, please like, comment, and subscribe, so more people can find the miracles hidden in nights like these. The cabin had grown quiet again after the sheriff's vehicles disappeared into the broken storm. The fire glowed warm and steady, but the air inside still trembled with leftover fear, like a breath held too long. Elena sat near the hearth, her newborn curled against her chest, both wrapped in the old Lakota blanket. Her copper-toned skin looked almost golden in the light, yet the faint tremor in her hands betrayed the terror she was fighting to keep beneath the surface. Sora pressed close to her legs, sensing the shift in Elena's heartbeat. The husky's thick silver fur lifted and settled with each slow breath she took, her blue eyes soft with concern. Ghostwind lay near the door, his ash-black coat shimmering as he kept guard, his posture watchful but calm. Kodiak settled behind Lila, allowing the girl to lean her entire back against his warm, massive frame, like a living fortress. Ethan moved around the cabin with slow, careful steps. Not out of hesitation, but out of respect. He was a man who knew the difference between protecting people and crowding them. The lamplight brushed across the sharp planes of his jaw, the scar over his brow, and the quiet, steady sorrow in his steel-gray eyes. His military training had taught him how to move through rooms silently. But tonight, he walked softly for a different reason. Because Elena was shaking. "Are you cold?" he asked gently. Elena lifted her eyes, but didn't answer. Not because she didn't hear him, because fear had settled into her bones so deeply she didn't trust her voice not to break. Ethan hesitated for a breath, then reached for the wool coat he draped over a chair. He stepped closer, slow enough not to startle her, and placed it gently around her shoulders. Her breath caught, not from the coat's warmth, but from the kindness behind the gesture. "Thank you," she whispered, her voice fragile as frost. Before Ethan could reply, a small hand slipped into his. "Lila." She looked up at him with those earnest dark eyes, the same eyes that had faced blizzards and horrors no child should endure. Her red scarf hung loose around her neck now, her cheeks flushed from crying, but her voice was steady. "Mr. Ethan," she said softly, "do moms also need someone to protect them?" The question pierced deeper than she could ever understand. Ethan's heart tightened, a slow, painful squeeze he hadn't felt in years. Memories flickered, faces he couldn't save, promises he couldn't keep, missions where he'd arrived seconds too late. It all rose inside him like a wave. He swallowed hard. "Yes," he said finally, voice low. "They do." Elena looked away quickly, but not fast enough to hide the tear that slipped down her cheek. She brushed it away with the edge of her sleeve before the children could see. But Ethan saw, and something in him shifted. Lila rummaged suddenly in her coat pocket. "Wait, I have something." She pulled out a small stone, smooth, pale blue, shaped by the river into a perfect teardrop. Ethan recognized it immediately. They had crossed a frozen stream hours before he found them. Lila must have picked it up in the middle of the blizzard. She held it out to him with both hands, as if offering something far more valuable. "Here," she said. "For luck. Mommy says brave men need something to hold on to." Ethan stared at the stone. It was small, simple, insignificant by any worldly measure. Yet it felt heavier in his hand than it should, like a promise he hadn't asked for, but suddenly needed. "Thank you, Lila." He said it softly, almost reverently. The little girl smiled, a tired, fragile smile, but a smile nonetheless. Elena watched the exchange with something unreadable glimmering in her eyes. Gratitude, fear, hope, maybe all of it tangled into one. Ethan slipped the stone into his pocket carefully, not like a trinket, like something sacred. The fire crackled, and for the first time since the storm began, something warm settled between the 4 humans and 3 dogs inside that fragile cabin. Not safety, not yet, but connection. Ghost Wind lifted his head sharply. No sound had been heard, no knock, no wind shift. But he rose anyway, slow, deliberate, ears pointed toward the ceiling as if hearing a voice no human could. Sora followed, growling low in her throat. Kodiak shifted his weight, placing his large body in front of Lila instinctively. Ethan tensed. His hand drifted toward the rifle leaning against the wall. Elena froze. "What is it?" she whispered. Ghost Wind's eyes glowed faintly in the firelight. He stepped toward Ethan, just one step, and touched his nose to the soldier's pocket. To the stone Lila had given him. Then he stared upward again, toward the rafters. Ethan's breath stilled in his chest. It wasn't danger Ghost Wind sensed. It was something else. Recognition, acknowledgement, like the stone itself carried a meaning no one yet understood. The baby stirred in Elena's arms. The winter mark pulsed once beneath the blanket. Just once. Soft, subtle, but enough for Ethan and Elena both to feel it. "What does it mean?" Ethan murmured. Elena shook her head slowly, eyes widening. "I don't know. But the mark, it responds." Ghost Wind lay down again, but his ears stayed alert. Whatever had awakened wasn't done. As the fire dimmed to embers, the family settled in for what they hoped would be a quiet night. Sora curled herself protectively around Lila's legs. Kodiak positioned himself directly before the door. Ghost Wind remained near the window, watching the world outside with silent vigilance. Ethan sat beside Elena, not touching her, not crowding her, just close enough that she knew she wasn't alone. "You did well tonight," he said softly. "You protected your children. You protected all of them." Elena exhaled a shaky breath. "I'm tired of being afraid." Ethan nodded. "I know. But you don't have to face it alone anymore." A long silence stretched between them. Not awkward, not heavy, just honest. It was the beginning of something neither dared name. A seed, a slow bloom, a warmth growing in the middle of a snowstorm. Elena looked at him, eyes shimmering with gratitude, and something deeper, something tender. "Thank you, Ethan," she whispered. He didn't look away this time. Always. Outside, the storm faded into a quiet hush. Inside, 7 souls. 2 wounded adults, 2 small children, and 3 faithful dogs. Took another step toward hope. Sometimes God plants love in the coldest winters, so it blooms stronger when spring finally comes. If this chapter touched your heart, Please like, comment, and subscribe, so more people can witness the gentle miracles he still writes into our lives. Morning drifted into the valley like a shy guest, brushing soft gold across the snow that blanketed the ranch. The storm had finally broken, leaving the world wrapped in a stillness so delicate it felt borrowed, fragile, temporary, too perfect to last. Inside the cabin, warmth gathered in pockets. Near the hearth, along the wooden beams, inside the laughter beginning to return to Lila's voice. Ethan stepped outside early, the cold biting into his cheeks with a familiarity he didn't mind. His breath rose in soft clouds as he examined the cabin's sagging side frame. The storm had weakened the wood months earlier, long before Elena arrived, and now the damage was undeniable. "Can't have you falling apart now," he murmured to the structure, patting the warped board. He grabbed his toolkit. His strong arms worked with practiced rhythm, hammering nails deep into the timber, muscles flexing beneath his flannel sleeves. Despite the weight in his past, those lost years, those ghosts, he moved with a steadiness shaped by purpose. For the first time in a long time, repairing something felt like more than a chore. It felt like building a future. Inside the cabin, Elena rocked the baby gently. Her long black hair fell around her shoulders like a dark waterfall, and her voice, soft, warm, carrying the cadence of old Lakota lullabies, drifted into every corner of the room. The newborn rested peacefully against her copper-toned skin, the faint winter mark pulsing only when he stirred. Lila sat cross-legged on the floor, her small hands smudged with charcoal. She drew with intense concentration, occasionally glancing at her mother and baby brother before returning to the page. Sora snoozed beside her, curled like a silver crescent moon. Kodiak lay across the doorway, his large frame rising and falling with each deep breath. Ghostwind rested near the window, still watchful even in sleep, his ears twitching every so often. The lullaby floated outward just as Ethan stepped back inside, brushing snow from his shoulders. Elena blushed faintly when she noticed him. "You're working too hard," she murmured. He shook his head. "Not hard enough. The cabin needs more space, especially with 2 kids and 3 dogs." Elena smoothed the baby's blanket. "You don't have to do that for us, Ethan." He paused, looked at her gently. "Elena, I want to." She lowered her gaze, cheeks warming again. But this time, she didn't argue. Across the room, Lila lifted her drawing. "Look," she said proudly. Ethan smiled and knelt beside her. The picture showed Elena holding the baby, the 3 dogs circling protectively, and Lila standing close. But something else stood out. Next to Elena, tall and broad-shouldered, was Ethan. He blinked. "Is that me? Next to your mommy?" Lila nodded with complete sincerity. "Yes. Because you make her smile." Ethan's breath caught in the way only innocence could disarm him. Elena's cheeks turned pink, her eyes darting away, but she didn't deny it. The room grew warmer somehow, the air shifting gently around them. "Thank you, Lila," Ethan said softly. Layla beamed. Elena tucked a strand of hair behind her ear, trying, and failing, to hide her smile. For a moment, time rested sweetly in the cabin. A tender quiet, a sense of belonging none of them dared speak aloud. Ghostwind's eyes snapped open. He rose in a single fluid motion, ears pricked toward the eastern ridge. Kodiak followed, lifting his head slowly, nostrils flaring. Sora nudged closer to Lila, her fur bristling with sudden tension. Ethan stiffened immediately. "What is it?" Ghostwind stepped toward the window, tail low, body focused. But something in his behavior was different. Not fear, not aggression, but recognition. The way he tilted his head, the way his eyes narrowed, it was as though he sensed a ripple in the air, a shift in the landscape itself. Elena stood, clutching her baby tighter. "Is someone out there?" Ghost Wind didn't growl. He gazed at the distant hill as if watching an invisible figure move across it. Then, the baby's winter mark pulsed. Not softly this time. Brightly. Once. Like a heartbeat echoing beyond the child's fragile body. Ethan stepped toward Elena, instinctively shielding her. "Elena, what does that mean?" She shook her head slowly, fear creeping into her voice. "It means something woke him, something familiar, something tied to the mark." Lila pressed against her mother's leg. "Is it the bad people?" Elena hesitated. "I don't know." Ghost Wind finally turned away from the window and walked directly to Ethan, placing one paw firmly on the man's boot. Ethan looked down. Ghost Wind lifted his gaze, solemn, steady, protective. It was a message. Whatever was coming, Ethan would have to face it too. The pulse of fear in the room slowly settled, though it lingered like a quiet echo. Ethan checked the outside perimeter again, moving through the snow with Ranger close at his side. Nothing stood out. No footprints. No movement. No sound. But the dogs weren't wrong. Dogs like Ghost Wind didn't react to nothing. Inside, Elena sat with Lila again, humming to calm her. Her voice wavered, but held steady enough to soothe the child pressed against her side. Ethan returned, snow melting off his boots. "Nothing out there," he said gently. "But I'm not ignoring the dogs. They sense things before we do." Elena nodded. "Whatever happens next, we'll face it together." Ethan sat beside her, careful not to crowd her, though their shoulders brushed lightly. "You're not alone anymore, Elena." She exhaled, soft and slow. "I know." The baby stirred, his tiny hand gripping a strand of Elena's hair. Lila crawled into Ethan's lap without hesitation. "Are we safe now?" she asked. Ethan pulled her close. "Yes," he said. "And this time he meant it. While I'm here, you're safe." Elena looked at them. Her daughter curled in Ethan's arms, the dog sleeping in a protective circle, the baby breathing calmly against her chest. And for the first time since this nightmare began, she allowed herself to believe it. Maybe God truly had placed them in the right hands. Sometimes the quiet between storms is the miracle. Sometimes love begins not with grand gestures, but with safety, warmth, and someone choosing to stay. If this moment touched your heart, please like, comment, and subscribe, so more souls can feel the quiet miracles God still writes into our lives. The sun dipped early behind the Montana peaks, leaving long blue shadows stretching across the ranch. Inside the cabin, warmth flickered in soft circles around the hearth, but tension wrapped tighter than any wool blanket. Ethan sharpened a wooden beam for the new support frame, though his hands moved slower tonight. Something heavy hung in the air, an uneasiness Ghost Wind had sensed first, and that Ethan could now feel in the cold between breaths. Elena sat in the rocking chair, her newborn pressed close beneath the Lakota blanket. Her copper-toned skin glowed softly in the firelight, but exhaustion carved delicate shadows beneath her eyes. Lila leaned against Kodiak, sketching something with a broken pencil, though her strokes were hesitant, unsure. The dogs were restless. Sora paced near the bunk bed, her silver tail flicking with quiet agitation. Kodiak kept shifting his weight, rumbling in low intervals. Ghost Wind stood by the window, ash-black fur bristling slightly as he scanned the darkening hills. The uneasy silence broke with a knock. Not the ominous knock of the man from days before, but a steady, familiar rhythm. Ethan moved first, hand brushing the handle of his rifle before he opened the door a controlled inch. Sheriff Cole Maddox stood there, bundled in his heavy coat, snow dusting his hat and shoulders. His lined face, weathered by years of winter patrols and harder years as a widower, looked more serious than usual. In his gloved hand was a folded slip of paper, stained by frost. "Evening," he said quietly. His voice, gravelly with age, carried a weight usually reserved for death notifications or war stories. "Found something you need to see." Ethan stepped aside to let him in. Ranger greeted the sheriff with a low chuff, then returned to his place near the fireplace. Sheriff Maddox glanced at the children, at the newborn, at Elena's tense grip around him. He hesitated before handing the paper to Ethan. This was inside the coat of the man we arrested. Ethan unfolded it slowly. The cabin fell into stillness. The fire crackled. Lila's pencil rolled onto the floor. Ghost Wind pulled his gaze from the window, as if sensing the shift in the room. Ethan read aloud, voice tight. "The child carries the blood of the Winter Watcher. Bring him before the thaw." Elena's breath hitched sharply. She clutched the baby closer, her knuckles whitening until they almost matched the snow outside. "No," she whispered. "Not him. Not again." Layla ran to her mother, burying her face against Elena's side. "Mommy, will they take him from us?" Elena wrapped both arms around her daughter and her newborn, gathering them like a shield. "No one will take you," she whispered fiercely. "Not while I breathe." Ethan watched the family trembling together. Something old and aching inside him stirred. Something he had buried beneath the weight of military missions, failed rescues, and the grief of those he couldn't save. But this moment, this woman, these children, they awakened the part of him that still believed in protection, in purpose. He stepped forward and reached into his pocket. From it, he pulled the old leather cord, the ancestral piece Elena had dropped days before, the one Ghost Wind had recognized by scent. He placed it gently into her palm. "We face this together," he said, voice steady. Sheriff Maddox's brows lifted slightly. He had known Ethan for years, had seen him broken, hardened, rebuilt. But never like this. Never with this quiet certainty. Elena looked up at Ethan. Her dark eyes shimmered, not with fear this time, but with trust. Deep, quiet trust. Lila looked between them, then clutched Ethan's sleeve. "You're not leaving, right?" Ethan knelt to meet her gaze. "I'm not going anywhere." Kodiak rumbled a warning toward the door, his massive gray-white body tensing. Sora hurried over to the children, curling protectively around them. Ghost Wind lifted his head and inhaled sharply, his nostrils flaring, not in fear, but as though he detected something shifting in the storm outside. Sheriff Maddox noticed it too. "Dogs don't act like that for nothing," he muttered. Then came a sound, a whisper carried by the wind. Not a voice, not quite, but something that made the hairs on Ethan's arms rise. Ghost Wind stepped toward the crack of the door, nose lifted to the air. His ash-black fur rippled, and his golden eyes glowed with an intensity that was almost reverent. The sheriff frowned. "What's he smelling?" Ethan exhaled slowly. "I'm starting to think this isn't just about bloodlines or cults or some deranged man's obsession." Elena finished for him. "It's older." Her voice trembled, but her posture straightened, like a woman standing in the shadow of a truth she had tried to outrun. Suddenly, Ghost Wind barked. A single sharp sound. The room froze. Ghost Wind did something none of them had ever seen. He approached the baby, not cautiously, not protectively, with purpose. He lowered his head until his muzzle nearly touched the child's swaddled shoulder. The winter mark beneath the blanket pulsed faintly, then brightened in response. A soft glow swirled under the fabric, as though echoing the breath of some ancient presence. Sora whimpered softly. Kodiak lowered his head. Even Ranger took a step back, unsure of what he was witnessing. Sheriff Maddox removed his hat, voice barely audible. "Lord above," Ethan whispered. "Does he recognize it?" Elena nodded slowly. Ghost Wind pressed one paw against the wooden floor, bowing his head, not in submission, but in acknowledgement. A protector meeting the heir he had been born to guard. The baby cooed softly, and the mark dimmed again, returning to its gentle, sleeping pulse. The moment broke them open with awe and dread. Something was coming. Something Ghost Wind had smelled long before any of them understood. Something that would not stop with one man arrested, and whatever it was. It knew the child was here. Sheriff Maddox straightened, clearing his throat, though awe still clung to his voice. "I'll run extra patrols. Maybe call in the state troopers. But I don't know if badges mean much against something like this." Ethan nodded. "Then we prepare." He turned to Elena. "To keep your family safe, we'll need to know everything, even the parts you were afraid to say." Elena held the baby close, breathing carefully, as though deciding whether truth would save them or destroy them. "I'll tell you," she whispered, "because he deserves a chance at life. And because you, all of you, deserve to know what you're fighting." Lila reached for Ethan's hand. Elena leaned into him without realizing. Ghost Wind curled at the baby's feet. Sora and Kodiak flanked the family like sentinels. A new kind of family. Fragile, strange, stitched together by fate and faith. And the greatest storm still waited beyond the ridge. Sometimes God does not calm the storm, but sends protectors to walk with you through it. If this chapter moved your heart, please like, comment, and subscribe, so more souls can witness the quiet miracles written into winter nights. Sometimes the greatest miracles do not arrive with thunder or blazing signs from the heavens. Sometimes they come quietly, through ordinary people placed in our path at the exact moment we need them most. A soldier who carries old wounds. A mother who refuses to surrender. A child born with a purpose no storm could silence. And the unseen hand of God, guiding them together in a world that can feel unbearably cold. If this story touched your heart, let it be a reminder. In our daily lives, God sends protectors, second chances, and moments of grace disguised as strangers, challenges, or unexpected acts of kindness. We are never as alone as winter tries to convince us. Share this story with someone who may need hope tonight. Leave a comment and tell us what part spoke to your spirit. And if you believe in miracles, in courage, and in the quiet work of God, subscribe to our channel so we can continue walking this journey of faith together. May the Lord bless you, keep you safe, and warm your life with His presence in every storm you face.